Thank you for coming out. How's everybody's Dragon Con this morning? My name is Tony Barletta. I'm Director of Comic Book Programming. I put all the comic book panels together, and I'm honored to be moderating a comic book panel this morning that everybody wants to see. Two legendary creators sitting next to me, Mr. Marv Wolfman and George Pérez. I'm sure you guys have heard their credits. I'm sure you know their books, New Teen Titans, and a little something called Crisis on Infinite Earths. So I'll start off by asking, how did the two of you first meet and end up working together?
Well, first time I met Marv, and Marv was my editor. I was working on a black and white series called The Sons of the Tiger for Deadly Hands of Kung Fu, and Marv was the editor of the black and white line. And he was one harsh editor. You know, I have to admit, you know, like I got very defensive with Marv. You know, again, I was just starting out, you know, so basically he's insulting my baby. But the thing is, I did learn a lot from Marv, particularly when Marv would, you know, point out the many things that were wrong with my artwork. And he was right. But at one point he addressed one thing that I didn't know. I didn't provide enough background to set a sense of place for characters. And
so I created the Frankenstein of those.
That's it, yeah. I needed to put more detail into my work and to understand how perspective worked. So in order to prove this little SOB wrong, I did a splash panel with the character of the White Tiger, doing, you know, just basically looming over a city. It was a symbolic shot where obviously he was giant size, crouching over a cityscape that went down in perspective, and the buildings formed his name, White Tiger, a la Will Eisner. At the time, I wasn't really familiar with who Will Eisner was. And showed it to Marv and said, do I know how to do perspective? And Marv said yes. And of course, in trying to prove Marv wrong, what I did was prove Marv right, because I addressed the problems that he said I had in my work. So I went that extra step to learn what I didn't know. So, and then I think Marv and I really didn't work together. We did one short vignette for a what if story. What if Nova gave his powers to a different person, you know, and I did a villain piece. And then we finally got to work on a Fantastic Four annual. And that was the only thing we worked on up until Marv approached me about this book that I didn't think would last 6 issues, the new iteration of the Teen Titans, of which I tell him every time, I'm so grateful he convinced me to do that book that I didn't think would sell. I just went to the Justice League. Because thankfully I have a retirement thanks to this wonderful man here.
I remember at the time that I guess I was the editor, and George at some point, this is after he did the White Tiger thing that was just mind-blowingly incredible. It was absolutely perfect and beautiful, and all the work from that point. That's why, considering I was arguing so much about things, did I keep using them? I was the editor, I could have used another person or something. And the answer was pretty typical. Even though the artwork wasn't quite there yet, his storytelling was 100% from day one. He told a story better than any of the people I saw. The art I knew would get better, because he was dedicated. It was obvious he was dedicated. But the storytelling you can't teach, and he had it from day one. And is constantly that, and that's the reason, because you pray to find an artist who can actually tell a story that well. Back then, you know, he did it.
So what's the working dynamic like between the two of you? How did it develop over the years?
I think on my side, I'd say in the very beginning of Titans, I would type up a plot, and George was free to do whatever he felt like with it. But as we both got more familiar with the characters, and as we understood the characters a lot better, the plots became a verbal thing. I may come into, because we lived a few blocks from each other, so we'd meet at a diner in Flushing, Queens, and we'd talk about all the stuff and we'd work it out. And I may come in with the original idea, and then we'd break it down, we'd talk about it, we'd find new ways of telling the stuff visually, and it became, the trust issue was there completely because we both knew those characters and we both loved the characters and we enjoyed working together. And it wasn't about, I'm going to become a superstar or anything. It's, let's make this book as good as we possibly can and have fun with it. And that's what it was right till the last thing we worked on, I guess was Games?
Yeah, the type of, what ended up being the tightest graphic novel years later, right. And it was wonderful. Marvel, like I said, when it started the typical quote-unquote Marvel style, where Marv did a plot, I did the artwork, then Marv did the dialogue based on what I did with the artwork. And at the end, when we were just discussing it, bouncing ideas back and forth. At the time, I had a better memory as far as Marv test than he did for detail. So it became we did the plotting, I had to then type out a plot to explain what I just drew so Marv can write it. So I was now writing the actual typed plot for Marv, because we were, I was remembering all those things we discussed, and of course, since I believe in a very organic system of storytelling, some stuff may be changed, there's some, my direction from A to B may become an arc as opposed to a straight line, and I had to then explain that to Marv. So of course now I'm typing a plot for my writer, which I love that. One of the things that Marv commented about how much we cared that the story was more important than either individual. Because I remember at one point I was reading the fan letters when I used to go into the office and read the fan mail, and I would see all these people commenting what a great Titan story. They loved how Raven acted in this one, the effect on Corey and Dick and everything else. And I said, didn't they like the artwork? They didn't mention anything about how they... But as Mark pointed out, yes, but they also didn't make any comment about my wordplay or what adjectives I've used, what adverbs I picked out, how flawed my dialogue is, because they were involved in the story. That the work became more important than its individual parts, and that's the real success of the Titans. Everyone cared about them, not about just the people who created them.
So speaking about the Titans, the two of you created Starfire, Cyborg, Raven, Deathstroke, so many amazing characters in that title. You brought in the established sidekicks we all love as well. Robin, Wonder Girl, Kid Flash, Beast Boy over from Doom Patrol. So where did the idea come from to put that particular team together?
I mean, well, from day one, I knew that I wanted to bring in some original characters. Wherever I've worked, I really enjoyed creating my own characters, and because that way I can tell the story the way I feel it should be told. And also, the concept of Titans in my mind was it's a family book. It's not a team-up book. It's not the Avengers. It's not the Justice League where characters just come together. I really wanted a family-driven book, so the characters had to be created from scratch with built-in backgrounds that would let them become a family-oriented book and story. So it required having brand-new characters in there. And from that point on, it's just developing them. Again, I may have had some of the original ideas, and when George signed in, we did it together, and then every character became a blend of both of us and what we were doing. But it required those brand new characters. I think if all you do is just regurgitate what was done in the past, it gets real boring. And as a writer, it will get incredibly boring for me. So creating new characters with entire worlds, and also every single character there is a lead into a story. If I wanted a science fiction story, we have Starfire as our entry. If we wanted a more horror story, we had Raven. A tech story and street story, we had Cyborg. A detective story, we had Nightwing, Robin the Nightwing. Every character there allowed me and George to come up with a genre that we wanted to test out right there or play with right there. So again, they had to be created in order to let us have that endless variety of type stories, that we would not get bogged down in the same thing all the time.
Yes, unlike the earlier incarnations of the Titans, where basically everyone was just a junior version of an established lead character. Obviously, Golden Eagle being Hawkman, and other characters just being, I call them the Justice Little League, and that needed to have an identity of its own. And of course, a lot of the characters were pretty well fleshed out. Obviously, I would add nuances along the way once I was involved with it. But Marv had pretty much come up with, this is what I want, my idea for Raven, this is my idea for the character Starfire and for Cyborg. But with no, he didn't ask for anything specific on visuals, so that became mine. The fact that the idea of coming with Raven literally to look as much like a raven with a cowl that came into like a bird's beak, and I kept it in shadow. And again, I was working with prototypes that, a book I did not figure was going to last 6 issues. So there were a few shortcuts I took that, in hindsight, I said, I might have thought it out better had I had more faith in the book at the beginning.
To be fair, at that particular point in DC's history, every new book for years was canceled by issue 6.
Yeah.
We just assumed that no matter what we did, it would still be canceled by issue 6. But so let's have fun with it. Let's just finally do the book that we wanted to do, and it gets canceled. But then we could say that we did it. George would go off on the Justice League. I would be doing Superman or something like that. And but what happened was the first issue sold enormously well, and then it started to go down the way comics do, because before you even know the sales of the first issue, you've done the second issue. And the second issue always drops because they print fewer copies. And it continues. And then by issue 5, it suddenly started to turn back up. And nobody was prepared for that, because it hadn't happened before. By issue 6, we had beaten out every book at DC at the time, and then it just kept going endlessly through the roof. It was pretty amazing. What's amazing to me, at this particular point in the history of the Titans, we now have a version of the Titans available to everyone, from little kids with Teen Titans Go, Teen Titans cartoon show, slightly older, the comic, slightly older, the adult version that's now in the on DCU. We have Raven as the #1 YA comic novel by Cami Garcia. They're on their 3rd printing. I mean, it's pretty amazing. These characters now have reached every possible demographic out there, and we just did it because we were having fun.
Sometimes that's the best thing, when you're not looking at, okay, what is the most commercial, but what is the creatively fulfilling, not putting the cart before the horse, as it were. Then we just wanted to do a good comic. And again, when Marv approached me about doing the Titans, I was going to give him the best I could do. And I remember whenever DC would put out house ads during the first year or so of the Titans, gosh, I wish I could start seeing like Starfire in the house ads, seeing Cyborg or Raven in the house ads, just to show that they are part of the DC universe, as opposed to just a private little book we're doing. And of course, that has happened in space, where they are so synonymous with the DC universe now that you can't imagine, the DC universe without Cyborg, Starfire, and Raven now. I was just waiting for them to be accepted into the family. And the first time I ever saw an ad where they showed a picture of Corey amongst, Superman, Batman, Green Lantern, Wonder Woman, said, "Oh, she's finally been accepted into the club, into the family." And that felt, okay, now they're integrated into not just the DC comics, but into the DC universe and the entire promotion of the company line.
So Marv, you mentioned that Teen Titans was about family.
Yeah.
And you took characters, the established sidekicks that had come with all of them pretty much a positive parental figure. The superhero that they fought with pretty much became their positive parental figure, and the characters you created came from had some adversarial positions with their family members. You look at Raven's sister and of course, I'm sorry, Raven's father, of course.
Frankly, every one of them has had problems with family.
Right.
But that's the thing that links them together, that keeps them together, because they're going through the same situations. And if you think about it, that's not something we just imposed upon characters. Most teenagers are breaking away from family. That's when it starts, and you start moving until you become on your own and everything else. So the characters are, in my mind, reflect what real people are going through at about the same age. And as you get a little bit older, you want to assert yourself more. Robin, Dick Grayson, is a perfect example of that, because he's going to develop his life outside of Batman, and there has to be reasons that, in a sense, throw him out from there. So, yeah, the characters were created specifically because they do resonate with what real people are going through.
And also, one of the things I give the credit to Marv on this is deliberate decision to make the characters universal and a bit timeless, so you don't end up using the current jargon at the time. You try to make these teenagers universal in time, so that you don't try to make them so contemporary that they become dated within 5 or 10 year or 7 year cycle, which, as the generations change. And I think that's been a great help in, unlike the previous versions of the Teen Titans, where they were trying, middle-aged men trying to write current teenage dialogue as they see it, and of course they hear that slightly tinny ear. But Marv tried to keep them grounded to something that everyone could identify. So if you're an older reader, you're reading it, oh yes, I remember being a teenager going through this. If you're a young reader, yes, I can identify with them going through this because I'm going through this now. And I hope in next generation, these are problems and decisions that are made in life that are something that every generation seems to face. And I think that's another reason why the Titans have stuck around for so long, is that they don't date. Other than the fact that we weren't that much older than the Titans when we started. We're old enough to be their grandparents now.
So, since we're talking about Titans, I feel we need to talk about one of the most famous storylines ever, the Judas Contract. So where did that story come from, and what's the history behind it?
Do you remember?
Well, the thing about it is the fact that we wanted to do a story that would play into fan expectations. I mean, the fan market was starting to become a burgeoning thing, and information was starting to disseminate very, very quickly. I mean, obviously, this was before the internet made this information, instant. But fans love to guess. They love to think that they know where you're going with this. So the idea of creating what, again, we've always had the obvious comparison with the X-Men, because we were the hot book at the time at DC, X-Men was the hot book at the time at Marvel, and there were similarities. So when it come up with the idea of doing a Kitty Pryde type character, as far as what the fans see, knowing full well from day one where we were going with Tara, that know that she is not going to be a person who's going to turn around and suddenly be a nice person. No, when we say the girl's a psychopath, she is.
And she's going to be right to the end. One of the fun things, and we've talked about this several times, because we still don't know how it happened, we get together at a diner, and that was a couple blocks from our houses.
The Hilltop Diner, remember it well.
Yep. And we were talking about the plot. Now, we knew that Tara was going to die and all of that. So, oh, sorry, spoiler. We knew where we were going, so we're discussing all the intricacies and the nuances and the twists and turns and all of this. And when we were done a couple of hours later, we suddenly realized we're talking about the
out loud.
Yeah, we're talking out loud about the murder of a 15-year-old girl at a diner, and not one person calls the cops on us.
I'm saying things, and we got to make sure that nobody sees the body. That we do see the body, the proof that she's dead. I mean, we were talking as if we were in a Martin Scorsese film, and only in New York, in a New York diner, can we walk out without a single person calling the cops, with two guys talking about offing a 15-year-old girl.
Well, I'd also like to talk about, of course, Crisis on Infinite Earths. So tell us a little bit about how the project came about.
Essentially, I was writing Green Lantern at the time, and somebody wrote a letter about the fact that DC continuity made no sense, and it was really hard back then because there were multiple Earths and multiple versions of characters, and unless you were a DC fan, the Marvel fans, who greatly outnumbered DC at the time, had no concept of what was going on at DC. And I mentioned, yeah, one day we'll fix this, I'm sure. And I got to a train station. A whole bunch of us were heading to a convention in Philadelphia, in someplace in Pennsylvania, either Philadelphia or Pittsburgh. And the story started to come, while I was waiting for everyone else, the story started to come to me. And by the time they got there, it was pretty much all worked out. And I spoke, I told them what it was, I told them where we were going, and they all loved it. So the following Monday, we went into the publisher's office and pitched it. And they loved the idea. Again, DC sales at the time were very low. Today,
Yeah, Titans was the exception at that point.
Excuse me?
Titans
Oh
was
yeah,
the
Titans
exception,
was
right.
it. Titans was the only exception. But the DC books, none of them were even coming close to the Marvel sales at the time, except for Titans, which was equal to it. And something needed to be done to show the Marvel fans how many good characters DC had. And this was about 1981 or so. And got the go-ahead, and we started working on it and all of that. Originally, George wasn't going to be part of it, but I kept going, please, he's the only person who could draw this. He's the only one who could not only draw beautifully, but understands the characters, understands how, and when you're having 400 characters, the artist needs that. And then George got involved with the plotting as well.
Yeah, when I found out about it, I said, I had my fingerprints all over it before I even saw it, guys,
Yeah. It was one of those situations where I was the writer, I was the editor, I was on staff at the time also writing. I was starting to lose my place, and George and I had developed this great working relationship. He came in and was able to say, you've already done that scene. Stop that. Be able to fix it, because it was just too much. And once George signed on, the job became a dream.
Yeah, like past issue 4, then I was following Marv's plot until that point, but then when I saw that he had just repeated a scene that he had done in the previous issue, I said, I think Marv, I mean, both of us at this point, but Marv's stature at DC was such that few people there wanted to criticize him or tell him he was wrong, because he was writing the top-selling books for DC. But of course, our relationship being what it is, that we know what it's like to try to fill the gap that the other one might have missed. So I came in and said,
it's desperately needed, by the way. If anybody goes and says, I just want it done my way, they're crazy. You need other people coming in and saying, wait a second, this is wrong, this isn't good. You always have to have somebody else doing that, and George is a master of that.
And again, vice versa. But it was one of those things that once I came in as a co-plotter on Crisis, I said, okay, because I know there's going to be a lot of fans who are going to criticize certain changes that are going to be made. And before I could just say, well, yeah, blame it on Marv, blame it on Marv. No, I've got to take some of the blame too. Now I'm complicit in the act. But again, it was like Marv and I had developed such a great working relationship that we knew, for me, yeah, well, you have 400 characters you want to draw? I'll make it 500.
He's crazy, but I love it.
Yeah. The thing is, it was a once-in-a-lifetime thing for me, and obviously I knew the importance of, if it worked, how important it was for DC, And what other chance am I going to get to be able to draw the Metal Men, to be able to draw the Sea Devils, Dolphin, Sergeant Rock? I mean, all these characters.
Sugar and Spike.
Yeah, Sugar and Spike. I snuck them into Bernie the Brain. I mean, all these characters. I said, this is a once-in-a-lifetime deal. And the one thing, of course, that Marv and I share to this day, we love the comics. I loved it. I was in the best playground. I mean, for 45 years, I got to do what I wanted to do as a child, since I was a child. Of course, Crisis on Infinite Earths was something that I needed to do, I wanted to do. And again, when I came in, when I heard about the book being done, it's like, they didn't have to ask me, I asked them. I think they probably thought I might have been burnt out of working too hard or something else or whatever, that I wouldn't want to do Crisis on Infinite Earths. But no, that book I needed to do. It was a fanboy dream come true.
I kept telling George all the things I was working on with it to hopefully get him excited. I didn't realize he already was about it. So.
Oh yeah, I mean, when the second I even heard the concept, when they said it was spinning off from Crisis, and then I just jokingly said, "Oh, so now it's Crisis on Infinite Earths now, huh?" And they decided, "Oh, that sounds good." So
it was the perfect title.
Yeah, but again, it was like my one regret from retiring because of vision issues. I really would have loved to have worked on one more thing with Marv, and we were actually planning on doing it, but then I realized I couldn't do it anymore. I can never draw to the level I want to on any kind of schedule. So, but I've said it about him, I said it to him, and I'll say it again. This is the gold standard by which I measure every collaborative effort. The man is not only talented, he's also incredibly supportive and incredibly generous. He encouraged me to write. At a time when there was no royalty or when there was no breakdown of plotting, Marv would get paid for plotting. He would give me half his pay for plotting. He would give me half his credit for plotting. He would, and when the royalties came in, he made sure that whatever he got, I got. This is the best collaborative.
A comic where there's a group of people producing it is not the effort of one person, and not one person alone should be rewarded for it. The people working on this book are putting their souls. I mean, it's truly your soul is being put up there because everything is coming out of you, and everybody should be rewarded. It's just, it took a long time for the industry to understand that, and I was thrilled that we came in at exactly that point.
Right. The Titans was the first mainstream comic to be part of a royalty program. And in fact, DC, being a very, very good company to work for, technically, since the Titans was already an existent book at the time they decided to start a royalty program, they didn't have to grandfather us in. But because of the Titans sales, if you didn't grandfather the Titans in, then your royalty program means nothing. And DC was well aware of it, so they said, okay, the royalty program starts and you will get retroactively now. It affects the Teen Titans, which is, of course, what's allowed us now to benefit from all the...
To slow down like the old, decrepit people we are becoming.
Oh, heavens no. I'm the youngest 65 I'll ever be. And the fact that, again, because I've had to retire, a lot of it due to my vision issues, thanks to the Titans, thanks to Marv convincing me to do to be part of the little engine that could, I can afford to retire. And I wish in this industry that I was not an unusual case. That a person could say, yes, I will retire, and I've enjoyed my run, and I can live the rest of my life comfortably, as opposed to, if this had happened to another artist who needs to get that page done every day, every month out in order to pay his bills, this would have been a death sentence. So I'm grateful that if it had to happen to any artist, it happened to me. Because at least I have a wonderful parachute that that allows me not to have a free fall, and I can now come to special panels and special tributes. And I joke about it. I've had a few people paid special tribute to me as I retired. I said, "Gosh, the only thing missing is me in a box." And I'm grateful to be able to hear all these nice things. Well, I'm still very young enough to appreciate them, and I thank you all for that. And again, I thank this man for giving me.
Now, the Titans was the two of us together. It was not any one of us. It was the two of us together, working together, and it could not have succeeded if we didn't get along and work as well together and care about each other in that particular fashion. The family extended to the creators, and as I said, all the people working on the Titans and all the books, it's so good that they can now get rewarded for it. You don't want what happened to unfortunately the previous generation that created everything.
Yeah, so I've been part of the Hero Initiative obviously since its inception, and one of the things that Marv touched on was that I am also very grateful for. You hear in every entertainment medium of collaborators who are short of trying to slit each other's throats, because the collaborative process is a challenging process, and there could be a clash of egos. But the fact that Marv and I have retained a friendship far beyond our working relationship, which one of the things I'm most proud of, is the fact that Marv and I are an example that yes, you can work together, create something, satisfy each other's egos as far as writing the best you can do, drawing the best you can do, and still remain not only mutually respectful, but actually loving friends as well. And I am very grateful for that.
The thing that always strikes me about Crisis is the scope of it. I remember seeing the first issue on the stands, and it was Superman leading a small team, and I thought, wow, this is really cool. And then all of a sudden it becomes so many versions of so many characters, and the Spectre fighting the Anti-Monitor. Did it always come full-fledged, or did the story morph at all over the time of creating it?
If the story was going to affect the entire DC universe, the entire DC universe had to be in it. I mean, it comes with the territory, and that meant it had to have 400 to 500 characters in it. Most of them are wallpaper. They're not being addressed in the, they didn't all have speaking parts.
Right. I do take exception to that. And I don't feel that any character should be wallpaper, because even if they just react in the background, they have to stay in character, yeah.
When I said that, I was more like they don't speak, so they're just there in one fashion or another, but you gave it life. Each one of those characters you can go and look at, and you know what they're thinking, which is amazing. It's just utterly amazing to me that you were able to do that. But yeah, it had to be that large, and once George signed on, it was like he could draw anything. So that opens up the freedom of me to think about all of that stuff, because there was absolutely nobody else in the entire industry who could have done that. That you could say, draw this scene. Because of other stuff down the line, I've been looking over all the Crisis stuff recently, and I am just amazed at how George fits in all those characters and all those panels and still has room. And every one of those characters are in character. They stand the right way, they move the right way, and it's pretty amazing to me. Yeah, but that's why, yes, all those characters had to be there.
And when Marv, when he was doing particularly when again doing plot, he would explain. He would have the important characters mentioned in the scene, and then I was also doing the covers for Who's Who. So I would go back and look at the Who's Who and say, okay, now who here can I put into that scene that he didn't mention, just so I can have more characters in there? And again, without sacrificing the story. Again, I might go from A to B instead of a straight line. I'll go into an arc, but I'll still get the 2 points connected, and that was the fun part. And the joke used to be to say, okay, this issue of Who's Who must come out, because that character wasn't, there's no reason for that character to be there except that he starts with the letter B, and we just got the second issue of Who's Who out. But again,
we actually hired someone to reread every DC comic from 1938 on and to make notes. Originally it was going to be for Crisis, but it turned out that we didn't need it for that, but it was done perfectly for the Who's Who. So we had a full record of everything DC ever did from day one, and it was pretty incredible. The poor guy, of course, had to be committed to an insane asylum. Yeah, his problem.
I call him Dad now.
Well, the thing about comic books in particular, it seems a character's death, it doesn't have, it's hard to get the emotion, because when a character dies, I mean, a lot of times you just know they're going to come right back. But in Crisis, you have the Flash, you have Supergirl, and what's the trick of killing off a main character and bringing so much emotion to it? and so much lasting effect for fans.
Well, I think if you think about these characters as real people, and their emotions are going to be real, and the characters have to react off of what is happening, just don't assume the super part of it. Just think of them as people, and then have people react as people would react. And frankly, it's as simple as that. I know most people back then, today it's different, but most people back then weren't doing it. But the Titans, to me and to George, I think, were real people who we imbued with power, as opposed to worrying about the gods. We're not worried about the gods. It's the man, not the super.
Yeah, and in the case of Crisis, it was the first. And the fact that DC at least, the fact that the two main characters we killed up and they're having TV shows. But the fact that they let it stand for a while. I mean, they actually put some stock in what we did in Crisis. So it took 20 years for the Flash to come back. Supergirl came in different forms, but we understood the business. You want to hold on to the copyright in the Supergirl name and the trademark in the Supergirl name, so you find a Supergirl, but it wasn't the same Supergirl, and that lasted for quite a while. Of course, it being a business, death is a revolving door in comics. I mean, Conan Doyle had to bring back Sherlock Holmes because of demand. Certain things you're going to expect. But considering that, and considering you are working for a large company with copyrighted characters, I give credit to DC that they let a lot of the repercussions of Crisis last for a lot longer than they would today, where in a much more corporate controlled atmosphere and cynicism brought out by that if a character dies, you are expecting them to come back within a couple of issues or within the first year. Death does not have that same impact than it did. Which is why I think that, I guess, the cover that I drew for Crisis 7, The Death of Supergirl, still resonates, because at the time, yes, it meant something. And in fact, I think the Flash's death was actually thought of first, and then we decided to kill Supergirl. And I think, and I'm going to give this credit to Marv, whether it was intentional or not, I just found it, because Supergirl's death made the headlines, that the Flash's death was not going to seem as big, because now he's the second major person to die, even though he was one of the first ones considered. But by the way Marv wrote it, where the Flash died, and at that time nobody knew it, because he died alone. I think that said so much and gave even more depth to the Flash's death than it would have had otherwise if he had died in the public arena the way Supergirl did. And I think that was smart.
I also think it was the fact that we did we did a lot of PR about the fact that Supergirl was dying. We put it on the cover. We did everything we possibly could to let people know that, so you wouldn't be suspecting that another character was going to die the next issue, and a character was even bigger because he was the father of the Silver Age.
Right.
So a lot of it was to always keep the readers guessing where we were going, but there were reasons for all those deaths, and there were reasons for all those characters, and Kid Flesh was already there. So, yeah, I don't know.
No, yeah, but again, I always thought that there was a certain subtlety and a wonderful melodramatic nuance to the fact that the Flash died alone after Supergirl died with all the fanfare. And I thought that really was, particularly,
well, Wally even says it. Kid Flash makes a comment about him dying alone.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So, yeah.
The Kid Flash was our avatar there in that.
And George, talk about the iconic cover to the Supergirl death. I mean, that's such an amazing cover. How did you come up with the concept for that cover?
Well, I mean, it was pretty easy. I mean, like, Lord knows that the Pieta style cover where holding a dead person had been done many times before. For me, even though I've since learned of others, including the incredible coincidence of John Byrne's Death of Phoenix cover, looked so much like the Crisis cover. I remember a cover with Odin holding Thor's body.
There was even one that I think Neil Adams did with Superman holding Lois Lane. So it's been done a while. So for me, the big thing was not just the death of Supergirl and the sorrow of Superman, but the DC universe around it in mourning. And again, you asked me to draw 2 characters, please. And the big thing, and of course, it's playing, the Where's Waldo game, but not taking away from the impact of the main figure, the death of Supergirl. That was the challenge. Yes, because I was having a fun time drawing all the characters, but I couldn't. I wanted them to be the audience. I wanted them to, feel the sorrow of the loss of a major hero, but not be called to attention. Say, oh, this is George Pérez just drawing a crowded cover. So that was the challenge, and I'm glad it worked. I think, even though I disagreed at the time, that one of the things that they did to make the effect work was knock out all the characters in the background into a monochrome, so that it popped Superman and Supergirl out there. At first, because of all the work I put into the detailing the characters, I objected to it. But in hindsight, that worked. That's when a colorist becomes part of the storytelling, when they know what to emphasize, and I think that was a very smart choice.
The cover, I don't know how many of you were fans of the TV show Fringe a couple of years ago.
Yes.
They had a story that had a lot of comic book covers on it in this alternate universe. It's not the regular universe, it's the other universe that was in the book. It was Earth 2, I guess. And it was Supergirl holding the dead Superman, and there it was.
Yeah, Ed McGuinness drew the Supergirl, Superman figures, and then they'd use my characters in the background. Right?
And they sent me the original, so that was pretty cool.
Oh, that's
but
cool.
That's how iconic that cover was, that they could put that on and everybody would know what that was about. That they flipped it, and because it was an alternate Earth, they could do that.
I'm very flattered. In fact, that cover has become iconic. Playboy magazine did an article on the sale of original artwork, and they used that cover as a full-page example. And I received an award, a humanitarian award, and they made these lucite cover reproductions for the awards. And mine, they used the Crisis 7 cover for my award. I said, wow, nothing says humanitarian than holding a dead woman's body on your award.
Well, if anyone has any questions, I invite you to line up at the mic at this time. But I'll also ask you...
The mic is over there.
Yeah, right in the middle here, if anyone has any questions.
There's always the brave first one, yes. Yes, no, two of them, yeah.
Okay. So you were saying about you came up with the idea for Crisis 1981?
Yeah.
And
it was advertised in DC as the history of the DC universe.
Okay. And then 85 and 86 is kind of like when it finally came out.
Worked on it a couple years, trying to come up with a story. Realized that the DC's 50th anniversary was coming up, so we postponed it until then.
Okay. And George, like how, one quick question for you, how long did it take you to like draw would you work on it like one page at a time or one issue at a time?
Oh, no, one page at a time, obviously, but again, depending on, if it was a book that had to come out every month I had to draw at least one book a month. So, and of course on Crisis, I was very proud that I never missed a deadline on Crisis on Infinite Earths. And with all the Crisis books that have been out since then, I'm still the only artist who drew every single page of every issue of Crisis. The only issue that was late, through no fault of our own, was ironically the death of the Flash. Because of the fact that the publishers, the printers, they stacked books and then they would put them in a certain order in order to print them. And for whatever reason, they put an issue of Army at War or something on top of the pile above Crisis. So Crisis ended up missing that shipping date because they didn't print it in the right order. So ironically, the death of the fastest man alive was the slowest book out. But the thing is, I was, a good deal faster than, and there's also a genuine, I loved what I was doing. I didn't want to go to bed. I didn't want to leave the drawing board. I wanted to get up and stay up and just keep drawing that book. I was having the time of my life. I didn't experience that again until like just the JLA Avengers book. So yeah, this is what I came into the industry for.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yes, let's go then, come on.
Hey, I just wanted to ask you guys, was there a point when you were either working together or working on any other books where you guys kind of had an out-of-body experience where you were like, I'm not just working on good comics, not even great comics, but truly legendary comics?
He said, was there ever a time that you realized you were working on not just good comics, but great comics?
And legendary.
Legendary.
Yeah. I think when the satisfaction of a story coming together so well with Titans, and this was the first one we totally did as a team, was Titans 8, A Day in the Life. When that issue came out, we realized, wow, this is special. This is better. This is really good. Before then, we knew we were doing comic, but that one resonated. That scene with the little kid and Cyborg, which is all George, by the way, was just, it defined everything that was going to come with the Titans for the rest of its run.
And again, one of those things that, as far as it becoming legendary, you never know. Obviously, that's what the fans decide. That's not what we decide. And you can't let that be your driving force. If you're working on it to say what's the most commercial, then you're basically just filling in slots to make this, the most formulaic thing that will sell based on history, as opposed to surprise the fan. Let the fans decide if a book's going to be a classic. And Stan Lee had commented at one time, what if Steve Ditko had drawn Spider-Man and Spider-Man tanked, he said, then there would have been another idea that just didn't work. This one, it was the right team, the right time, and the right attitude on the books. Again, I think Marv agreed. Neither one of us ever could have imagined the Titans would be the success they became, that they would last well past our involvement in the books, and probably lasting well past our own time on this earth. So, you never know, but the thing is, you guys are the ones who decide that. So thank you.
First, I want to thank you for another unexpected success. Ted Cord, Blue Beetle, thank you for bringing him into Crisis #1 into the DC Universe. What I do want to ask you about is what happens to your creations later. My wife and my daughter, I had to explain to them that Slade Wilson is actually from the Teen Titans, because they watch Arrow with me. What do you think of the Arrow?
Yeah.
What do you think of the Arrowverse version of Slade Wilson that's a different person than the one that you created?
First of all, I love what the Arrowverse does. They have the same love for the characters that we do. I've spoken to them, I've been with them, I know all these guys. They really love the DCU at that time. There was an interview with Greg Berlanti at some point, and this was years ago, where he said, for his generation, most of his friends were reading Watchmen and all these dark things, and what he loved was the Titans. And he said Marvin George's Titans were it for him. So these are people who love it, and that love comes through. I don't mind the changes. Our book hasn't changed. What we did is still, has now been collected into any number of reprints of that particular material. They're finding another way to go, and they're doing a great job. I really just enjoy watching the shows, and I've seen every episode of all of them. So.
That's great. Thank you for creating time. I enjoy watching the show.
And Mark, since you brought up Arrowverse, I believe you're co-writing an episode of the Crisis coming up, aren't you?
I read that.
Hi. I want to talk a little bit about your how you collaborated, and I was wondering, what pieces did you fill in for each other? What's the most important thing you learned from each other? And what advice would you give people who are trying to collaborate? Because you're so good
Well,
at it.
one of the things I learned, a major one, in fact, I mentioned it earlier, is the fact that in the collaboration, it's the work that matters, not the individual person involved, and definitely not a question of one ego trying to supersede the other. That you're trying to do the best story, to understand that you need somebody's feedback, whether it be a writer working with an editor on coming up with a story, or a collaboration between writer and artist, that you need to think of what's best for the story, understanding the characters, and being able, as I think Marv one time quoted William Goldman, to kill your babies. That sometimes you have an idea that you think it's great, but it's not working in the story, and you have to be willing, okay, we have to kill it, we have to get rid of it, and if somebody else can come up with something better, you work with it. And
It's, I think to keep a collaboration working, rather than argue and fight over some concept that's in the story, if you get to that point, and we actually never fought, but it's easier to create something brand new than to be arguing with each other and creating problems. So if you're talking about getting to work with somebody and you're coming up with material that the two of you, one of you disagrees with, get rid of it, forget it. Find another thing to do, find another way around it. It's far better than having to argue or anything else that can hurt that collaboration. We amazingly never argued about any of that stuff.
I mean, that doesn't mean we didn't disagree, because again, we're creators. But the thing is, that's exactly right. The fact that it's like, parents wanting to do what's good for the child. And, you do what's best for the child.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, thank you for being here, and I want to direct this to Mr. Perez. I was at a panel and there was a young fellow asking a visual artist, creator about getting into the business, things like that, and I forgot all the details, but basically the gentleman commented that back in the older days, you didn't have to really be talented, you just have to be hungry to get in. And now, something about that, with all the technology and all this. Me personally, I like the old school because I think you have to create from scratch, and I think now the technology opens up a lot of room for not really, I don't know, what do you think?
Well, the thing is, technology, like a pencil, is a tool.
Right.
I mean, if you don't have the inner talent, like I say, if you an artist using the poser, if you don't know how to manipulate poser to create your own version of the figures, then you're drawing like everyone else is. Because poser, all you have to do is move the characters around. It's the same thing. In the case of comics, there are artists of different calibers, and of course, depending on your taste, what you consider a good artist, what you consider a good. But storytelling is what's different about comics. I've seen a lot of great illustrators out there, but if they can't tell a story, they're not serving this industry. They're not serving, we're not drawing posters, we're telling a story. So that is a major difference. And that's a talent that you nurture, and as Marv was flattered me by saying that that's what got me in the industry when I was not really that polished as an artist, And a lot of things, like when they started doing digital color, I started seeing people, oh my God, we have 1 million colors, let's throw every one of them onto a page. No, because then you're also affecting storytelling. You start affecting clarity. But then there are those who know how to use it, they know how to tell stories. So, like anything, it's not the tool, it's the creator, it's the artist, it's the person who's actually manipulating that. And talent will out. Yes, one of the things that, of course, that technology has provided is a level playing field. That you don't have to go and have your work published by a major company if you don't want to. You can publish it yourself, sell it at conventions. If you can find a distributor, fine there. So it levels the playing field to some degree. But the artists that last in this industry, the artists that seem to have, who can make a living for decades on end, are those who understand that one fundamental thing is that we are graphic storytellers.
Right.
And that's, I think, that's an important thing to always remember. No matter what tool you have, you can't replace that. That you always have to
has to be the foundation of anything that you do in the book and any tool you use in it.
I always think about the amazing environments you created, but thank you very much. Thank you, gentlemen.
I'm feeling a lot of DC love in the room, but I want to go back to the 70s. Marv, what was your favorite Fantastic Four member to write for? And George, who was your favorite Fantastic Four member to draw?
Oh, to draw was the thing.
What's your favorite?
So whose voice did, yes, to write
Fantastic
for?
Four 200. The end scene with Dr. Doom.
Yeah. Easy.
Hi there. I just want to say I've been reading Teen Titans, New Teen Titans since it first came out. So unlike all these young people in the room, I remember what that felt like, what the Judas contract felt like.
Ooh, I felt
was
liquor spots
astonishing.
just pop out of my hand. Wow.
I'm going to throw a philosophical question at you, if I may. There was a time when DC and Marvel were both going to go out of business. I mean, you probably remember that there were some dark days where they financially were not holding up. Now comics are huge. The movies that they make, mostly Marvel admittedly, and the TV shows and all these various forms, this has become really big and really mattered. And I didn't know if you had any thoughts as people at the creative end, why on earth this stuff is resonating in a way 30 years ago maybe that it just seemed like it was silly stuff for kids, and now it's a big deal.
I think because the kids who read it when they were 12 are now in charge.
Yeah, the geeks have inherited the earth.
So we only have 5 minutes left, so make questions as quick as you can. Thanks.
Sounds good. Hey, nice to meet you guys. One of my favorite storylines has always been the Judas contract, and I've always been curious about the character of Tara. Tara is always, I find her fascinating. Did you guys from the beginning knew that she was going to be the traitor? Because I was always reading the comic book, I was like, oh, she's going to, like every other story, she's going to...
Tara was not a traitraitor.
She was
a
bad.
psychopath. She was always always bad. Therefore, she wasn't a traitor. Just you all thought that she was a traitor.
And you all thought that she was going to change her ways at the end, because we deliberately made her as cute as a button, everything else, obviously with a bit of that teenage sarcastic attitude. But no, from day one, we knew that that girl was toast. Or going to have a dirt nap that's befitting her name. But we knew it from the beginning, and that was.
In the writing, every so often I would have her halt, stutter or something, and it was very clearly planned on when I was writing it and having those things in, that for her it was, she's trying to figure out what to say, and for the readers, they would be going, she's having a change of mind, she's going to become good. No. She had to figure out how the terror character she created would actually respond.
Hi, so you guys have written some of the most iconic deaths in comics. We've seen some of them, but you've left off of this presentation the saddest death that you guys ever did. Tales of the Teen Titans 50, Narc dies off panel, I cried. I think comic fandom has never been the same since. Well, I want to know why.
Narc died off panel?
What character again, sir?
Narc. The caveman. You don't even remember that you killed him. That's
I don't remember. I have no memory.
Culpable deniability.
Every answer is a twist of the knife.
All right.
Okay, thank you.
Were we just following orders? I don't know.
Judas contract was the first thing I spent my first working paycheck on. I came to Dragon Con specifically to see you two. So I appreciate you being here. I was always curious though, did the Titans ever find out about Slade and Tara sleeping together? And what was their reaction? Because that was kind of like...
Why, did you tell them?
I will.
No, again, it was between them, but again, it's like any fiction. We're seeing it. It doesn't matter that they know, you know.
Thank you.
Hey.
Hello, my question is for...
That dog's wearing
George.
shoes.
Yes.
It's cute.
My question is for George. I've been collecting comics for over 40 years. My collecting was always driven by who the artist was, not necessarily the character. Obviously, I followed all of your stuff, but I always wondered, how did you go make your decision to draw one particular group or character, or do a particular run of a particular character versus another one that you weren't doing?
Well, because they're available for one thing. Like obviously, I never did the X-Men because they already had an artist on the X-Men. I did one annual because he wasn't available, and Chris really wanted to work with me, and I enjoyed working. In fact, Chris to this day has been moaning the fact that he's only worked with me once in his entire career. But the thing is, for me, which is why Crisis was the perfect book for me. No, I want to draw everybody. There's no one that scares me. And now, thankfully, when I started my career, inkers hated the idea of having to ink me because of the fact that I put a lot of work in. Once royalty started, once I was such a name that my books sold and thus they would earn royalty, it's amazing how many inkers have come out. Thank you. Yes, Desiree.
Hi.
Hi, hon.
This is a question more for Marv, and it's a loaded one, so I'm sorry in advance.
A little louder.
Okay, sorry. This is a loaded question for Marv. We are in an age where there is a lot of political turmoil and cultural bias and a lot of chaos out there and divisiveness. As a writer, do you feel in your writing that you are responsible for addressing some of these issues in your writings, or do you feel like you want to avoid them entirely? When you do, how do you try to...
I'm not when I come up with a story, I'm not writing what I believe. I'm writing what the individual characters within the story believe. Because it's not about me. Therefore, whatever my politics are may not be the politics of Dick Grayson or Raven or Vic Stone or any of the other characters, or Vigilante or Deathstroke or Dracula. You know, I did that. So I am not writing my political viewpoint, I'm not writing my religious viewpoints or any of that stuff. I'm writing about those characters and what I believe those characters should all be thinking, and they don't all agree with each other. So, again, that's it. Yeah. I'm not writing about me, so no, you'll never see any of me in there. You'll see only those characters.
But do you feel like you should address them in some way that... I don't know if I'm addressing my question.
If I were writing a political story, specifically to write a political story, it would be different if I was writing a religious story. But as long as I'm writing about characters that are not me, it's not going to be about me, and I don't have to worry about that. Also, I believe comics should be read by everybody, and I don't want to alienate anybody from reading what I hope will be a really fun story that they'll remember for a while.
Well, thank you all for coming. We're out of time, but I just want to thank my guests, Marv Wolfman and George Pérez. You can see these gentlemen in Artist Alley in America's Marv and the 4th floor, building 2.